Do you remember all the walking from The Lord of the Rings? Do you remember the teleporting from Game of Thrones? Yeah, me too. And it's too soon. But nonetheless, I want to talk today about travel in a fantasy world. Everything from all the walking to magical devices and how to use them. My name is Marie Mullaney, and this is another episode of Just in Time Worlds. If you like this kind of world building content, please do consider smashing that subscribe button. And if you really like it and want to help me make more of these videos, you can check out my book, The Hidden Blade, links down below, or you can hit my Ko-fi page, links down below as well. Okay, enough of that. Let's get cracking with travel in a fantasy world. So, there are various modes of transportation in fantasy, the most obvious of which is walking, and I'm sure that we all remember all the walking from Tolkien. All the walking to the delight of the New Zealand Tourist Board. Under this mode of transportation, I also group riding animals. And the reason why is because they both have the same limitation, which is to say, how much can you carry? Yes, the mode of transportation is slow, but really the problem comes in with you can only carry X amount. I mean, if you're going to say it takes you 20 days to travel between these two towns, does it really make a difference how slow it is? Not so much. But a human can carry comfortably, let's say, 20 kilograms. So that's the extent of what you can carry with you. Or maybe if you're having a horse, then you can load a little bit extra onto the horse. But the point is, without a vehicle, you are limited to how much you can carry. And this, for me, is the real downside of riding and walking. What it does allow you to do is explore the animals of your world in a whole new way. And a great example of this comes to us from Dune. The Fremen ride the sandworms. Now, what's really great about the way that Frank Herbert did this was the sandworms are in no way tame. Our Fremen hook their hooks onto the sandworm's scale and lift the scales, which prevents the worm from submerging into the sand. This makes riding the sandworm not so much about bonding with a tame animal or anything like that, but about being capable physically of capturing the sandworm, which is an honestly amazing approach. Of course, you can also go with that exploration of building a bond between the rider and the animal. A good example of this comes from Harry Potter, where you have to bow to the griffin, and if it bows back and acknowledges you, then you can get on its back and ride it. In my second book, where I start exploring the Kisangi continent of my world, I have the Masoraxi, which are giant serpents that the rider needs to form a bond with in order to be able to mount them and ride them. And there's a link to the World Anvil site down below. If you like the sound of my world, do check out my book. And of course, you can go with walking or riding a horse and all the traditional means around that. So that is the first and easiest mode of transportation, which is to say walking or riding on an animal's back. Let's check out how vehicles change the picture of transportation. Now, as I said, one of the big downsides of walking is how much you can carry. A vehicle changes that significantly. On a vehicle, you can have a bigger load. Even a small carriage like a sulky can still carry a load attached to it. And of course, you can have larger carriages that are pulled by, say, 4-horse teams that can take quite a big load. Or if you're having a more modern world, you can have the internal combustion engine and a car, which of course can take a significant load, right up to spaceships that can transport whole colony worlds. You can also use magical vehicles in this. I think of specifically Glenn Cook and the Black Company, where the magic carpet, that most iconic of items, is a vehicle that the mages ride, and he uses these carpets very well in this transportation capacity, both in terms of moving faster than people walking and in terms of transporting more than a person can transport. Interesting things to think about if you are using vehicular transport is what is pulling the vehicle and what is your mechanism for movement. So we have in our history had travioses, which is basically two crossed poles pulled by a horse. We have had the wheel, obviously, which caused an explosion of vehicular transport and all of the wheeled vehicles associated with that. And then what we are still missing is a hover skateboard, a hoverboard. And man, I really want to know where our hoverboards are because they should be here by now. All of those vehicles do have certain requirements, like wheeled vehicles generally require some kind of road. Or maybe you're using a train style of wheel, in which case you need some kind of track to travel on. Or if you have skyborne transportation, like a hoverboard or a vehicle that can take to the air, you have to consider air traffic control style of problems, like keeping people from colliding with each other in the air. So if you're using vehicles in your transportation, the biggest element to consider is how do the vehicles travel in comparison with other vehicles. There is one specific type of vehicle subset that I want to discuss, and that is the vehicles driven by nature's power. Now, I specifically want to highlight these vehicles because obviously there is the ones we have in our world, but the example that I want to talk about is Avatar: The Last Airbender. In Avatar, you have the airbenders who have the gliders that they can use the element of air to travel with. You have the earthbenders that can ride on the wave of the earth, but you also have the guys on those sand gliders by the library where they can use the sand to move this vehicle forward. And you have the waterbenders, remember those swamp dudes who can move that swamp canoe through the water and travel using the elemental power of their element. And of course, the firebenders can generate power for what amounts to their internal combustion engine using fire. Now, what I really liked about the way that this world is built is all of these vehicles work with the magic system. It's all nature-driven vehicles, so it's semi-natural power, but it is the benders who take nature and make it into the power that drive these vehicles forward. It is an absolute masterclass in how to design vehicles that fit your world's feeling and work with your world's magic. It is gorgeous in its integration. So if you're looking at building a vehicle that works with your world's magic, you would do well to take a look at how Avatar built its vehicles that work with elemental bending. They are superb. So these are all methods that work with the real world. But that is not your only way to get around in a fantasy world. You can have actual teleportation, just don't do what Game of Thrones did. Make sure that it actually works in your world. There are 3 specific teleportation examples that I want to look at in this context. The first comes from Anne McCaffrey's Talent series. These guys can teleport using psychic talents, and they can extend the range of their teleportation by drawing on the power of generators, by drawing on power generated by the internal combustion engine. They can move themselves, they can also move others, and they can move ships. How Anne McCaffrey uses this is they become hubs in a 9-star league, like a space-going league, and they throw spaceships from planet to planet instantly using teleportation. So the one prime, T1, will send the ship, and the receiving T1 will catch the ship and put it down in its cradle. It works so well with her world because it allows her to have this massive intergalactic human civilization driven by these rare talents that sit in each world, and each of them capture and move massive cargoes of ships. If you include such an ability, bear in mind that those characters have access to that ability. If something goes wrong on Earth and your main character is on Mars or Betelgeuse or wherever they are, there's nothing stopping them from just hopping back home and dealing with the situation. So there's no preventing people from getting to where the problem lies if you have that level of teleportation available. Especially if that level of teleportation allows you to move not just yourself, but multiple other people as well. The second example that I want to talk about also comes from Anne McCaffrey, but this one is the Dragon Riders of Pern. The Dragons of Pern have got access to teleportation. The dragons themselves can teleport, but they generally only teleport their riders. But this is a more limited form of teleportation because only the dragon riders have ready access. What this creates is a different situation where a small elite have got access to this kind of teleportation, and that evokes jealousy in your society. How does the rest of the population feel about dragon riders having this kind of access? Are they jealous? Does it make them angry? Does it make them resentful? And if it does, what impact does that have on your society? And then the last form of teleportation that I want to discuss is the Stargate franchise. Now, how a Stargate works is you have a Stargate over here and a Stargate over here, and you dial a number on this Stargate, and that establishes a wormhole to another Stargate. And then you can travel between the two. The item can be used by anyone who has access to it, but you have to dial the right number. So you have to know what the number is, and you have to have the time to dial it. And the amount of Stargate episodes that had to have "Quick, Carter, dial the gate," or "Quick, Daniel, dial the gate," there was a lot of tension evoked by the time required to dial the gate and by trying to find the right code to dial. That allows you to have your instant teleportation when you need it, but also to build tension into using that instant teleportation because it is based around this device that needs to be operated and can be operated by anyone. So those are the three kind of teleportation models that I like. There is one more thing that I want to talk about in terms of travel in the fantasy world, and that is travel hubs. Now, typically when we think of travel hubs, we think of islands where people stopped over, or a good example actually is the tip of South Africa, the Cape of Good Hope, where the ships would stop on their way to the Far East from Europe, that long journey around the southern point of Africa. In a fantasy or science fiction world, you can set up a travel hub in any way that you like. And the two examples that I want to talk about is first in the science fiction world, Babylon 5. Babylon 5 is a hugely underrated TV series. You have multiple races who come and dock at the station Babylon 5 and interact with each other just on the station. It is really great because you can have all of these races just wash into and out of the station. Maybe they come in for an episode and then they just wash out again. And all of these different ships interacting. And so it gives you this place where all the races and all the species can interact with each other, and yet it builds its own culture internal to that hub. So there was a bar, there was security services, there were permanent characters who interacted with each other all the time, and then things that happened and washed through there. It is a travel hub of a very different nature, allowing you to have slice of life moments of each of these different species as they interact with the station. Now, you would think that this is something that is mostly a science fiction approach, and you'd be right. But there is one example of a travel hub from fantasy that I must talk about in this discussion, and that is Raymond Feist's Hall of Worlds. The Hall of Worlds is a cosmological construct where different worlds have got these doors on them, and you can take the door, you enter into the Hall of Worlds, and then there's this long corridor with doors along the side that you can open to then go to different worlds. In the Hall of Worlds, there's also a tavern where you can go to. Of course, there's a tavern where you can go to get jobs, meet people, interact with other hall denizens. The Hall of Worlds is used so well by Feist. People can come in there, do a few things, and go back out. They can hop between worlds. They can interact at the tavern. It's a fantastic travel hub. So if you're considering doing that kind of a travel hub approach, it is well worth checking out how Raymond Feist built the Hall of Worlds and what he used it for. The interesting thing about these travel hubs is you can have cultures that exist only in those hubs and exist not at all on the worlds where they come from. And why that matters is it allows you to explore different culture subsets without impacting your main world. It gives you almost a hidden world to explore things in without affecting the actual world where you have the characters doing their thing. So that's more or less the fantasy examples in a nutshell. So when you are deciding what kind of travel to use in your world and what impact that will have on your world, consider things like if you have instantaneous travel, what impact does that have on your plot? Do only the elites have it, or is it something that's generally accessible to the population? If you have wheeled vehicles, do you have roads? Or do you use some kind of flying device? And if you're using magical transportation, do make sure that it fits your world and that it doesn't feel completely out of place. Like if you just pull a magic carpet out of nowhere when you've got nothing else that feels like magic carpet style of travel, you're going to lose the people who are in your world at that point because it doesn't feel right and therefore they get jerked out of the flavor of your world. So try and build your travel so that it works with your world. So that is my take of travel and transportation in a fantasy world. I hope that you enjoyed that episode of Just in Time Worlds. Please do hit the thumbs up button if you did. If you really enjoyed this and you want to help me make more of these videos, you can buy my book, The Hidden Blade by Marie M. Mullaney, or you can hit my Ko-fi page where you can make a one-off donation, buy a membership, or even buy a product.